Ethan Miller was the kind of guy who always had something to say. Fresh out of college with a degree in political science, he spent most of his free time scrolling through news articles and posting fiery opinions on social media. He believed strongly in fairness, equality, and standing up for what's right, even if it meant ruffling a few feathers along the way. But life after graduation wasn't exactly how he'd imagined it. Instead of landing some dream job where he could change the world overnight, Ethan found himself working as a waiter at Leavitt's Bistro, a fancy restaurant tucked away in the heart of downtown. The place had a reputation for being upscale but approachable. Its menu featured locally sourced ingredients, and its owner was rumored to be someone big in the community, maybe even connected to local politics. Ethan didn't pay much attention to those details when he first started. To him, the job was just a paycheck until something better came along. Still, he couldn't deny that there was something special about the vibe of the place. The staff seemed friendly enough, and customers often praised the food. It wasn't perfect, though. Ethan noticed early on that some of the policies felt more like lip service than real action. That bothered him, but he kept his thoughts mostly to himself, for now. On his third day, while setting tables during prep hour, Ethan overheard two coworkers whispering near the kitchen door. One of them mentioned the owner's name casually. "Did you know Jasmine Crockett owns this place?" they said. Ethan froze mid-motion, holding a stack of napkins in one hand. "Who's that?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The coworker shrugged. "Some politician or business person, I think. She doesn't come around much, but apparently she's the reason we get all these cool initiatives here." Ethan nodded, pretending to understand, but inside, he was clueless. He'd never heard of her before. Maybe she was one of those rich folks who like to slap their name on things without really caring about the people behind the scenes. He filed the information away in the back of his mind, figuring it didn't matter anyway. What did an owner do besides sign checks and show up for photo ops? Besides, Ethan had bigger things to worry about, like remembering which forks went with which courses and not spilling soup on anyone important. Little did he know, fate had other plans. In just a few short days, Ethan would find himself face to face with the mysterious Jasmine Crockett, and everything he thought he knew about the restaurant, its owner, and even himself would be turned upside down. For now, though, he was just another new hire trying to keep his head above water in the fast-paced world of fine dining. As the lunch rush began winding down, Ethan took a moment to catch his breath. Leaning against the counter, he glanced around the room. The sunlight streaming through the windows made the polished silverware gleam, and soft jazz played in the background. Everything looked picture-perfect, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Sure, the restaurant talked a good game about supporting workers and giving back to the community, but was any of it real? Or was it all just for show? He didn't have answers yet, but deep down, Ethan hoped he'd figure it out someday. After all, he hadn't given up on his dreams of making a difference. He was just waiting for the right opportunity to come along. Little did he know it was closer than he realized. The restaurant was buzzing with energy that Friday night. It was one of those evenings where every table was booked, and the staff moved like a well-oiled machine, weaving between chairs and dodging each other in the narrow aisles. Ethan had been working at Leavitt's Bistro for just over 2 weeks, but this was his first real test under pressure. The dinner rush was no joke. Orders came flying in from every direction. Customers snapped their fingers for refills, and the kitchen crew shouted instructions over the sizzle of pans and clatter of dishes. Ethan felt the weight of it all as he balanced a tray loaded with plates high above his head. His uniform shirt clung to his back, damp from the heat of the kitchen and the stress of keeping up. He reminded himself to breathe deeply and stay focused. "One step at a time," he muttered under his breath, repeating the mantra his trainer had drilled into him during his first week. As he made his way to drop off an order at table 12, he noticed a reservation slip on the host stand marked Crockett. The name rang a faint bell, though Ethan couldn't quite place why. A moment later, a woman walked in, dressed sharply in a tailored blazer and heels. She carried herself with confidence, her presence commanding attention without saying a word. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes scanned the room as if she owned the place. which, unbeknownst to Ethan, she technically did. She was seated at a corner table by the window, bathed in soft golden light from the setting sun. Outside, Ethan approached cautiously, holding his notepad and pen at the ready. "Good evening," he said with a polite smile. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The woman glanced up from her phone, her expression unreadable. "Water, for now, thank you," she replied, her voice calm but firm. There was something about her tone that made Ethan pause. It wasn't rude or dismissive, but there was an air of authority that caught him off guard. He scribbled down her request and hurried away, already mentally preparing for the next task. When he returned with her water, she gave him a quick nod of thanks before returning to her phone. Ethan lingered for a second, unsure whether to say anything else. Normally, he tried to strike up small talk with guests. It was part of the charm, after all. But something about this woman made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way she seemed so absorbed in whatever she was reading, or maybe it was the fact that she looked like someone who didn't have time for idle chit-chat. Either way, Ethan decided to leave her be, for now. A little while later, she flagged him down to place her order. Ethan jotted it down carefully, making sure to double-check for any special requests. As he turned to leave, he added with a playful grin, "Don't worry, we'll make sure your meal reflects our commitment to fairness and equality." He didn't think much of the comment. It was just his way of trying to connect with people. But when he glanced back at her, he saw the faintest hint of a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "Fairness and equality, huh?" she said, almost to herself. "I'll hold you to that." Ethan chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond. "Absolutely," he replied, backing away slightly. "You won't be disappointed." As the night wore on, Ethan found himself stealing glances at her table whenever he passed by. She hadn't touched her phone since placing her order, instead sitting quietly and observing the room around her. Occasionally, she'd lean forward to listen intently as a server explained the dessert options to the couple seated nearby, or she'd watch the bartenders mix cocktails with precision. It was almost as if she were studying the place, taking mental notes on everything from the lighting to the way the staff interacted with customers. Curiosity got the better of Ethan, and when he finally delivered her entree, a beautifully plated dish of seared salmon with seasonal vegetables, he decided to break the ice again. "How's everything looking so far?" he asked, gesturing toward her plate. She looked up, meeting his gaze directly this time. "It looks wonderful," she said, picking up her fork to take a bite. After chewing thoughtfully, she added, "Though I'm more interested in hearing what you think about the place." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Me? What do I think?" She nodded, resting her chin on her hand. "You work here, don't you? Surely you must have opinions." For a split second, Ethan considered brushing her off with some generic response, something safe and neutral like, "It's a great place to work." But something about her tone told him she wanted honesty, not platitudes. So, against his better judgment, he decided to open up. "Well," he began hesitantly, glancing around to make sure none of his coworkers were listening. "I mean, it's a nice restaurant. Fancy food, fancy atmosphere, but sometimes it feels like we're catering to, well, privilege, you know? Like, we talk a lot about supporting workers and giving back to the community, but I'm not sure everyone upstairs really understands what that means." To his surprise, she didn't look offended or annoyed. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Go on," she encouraged. Ethan hesitated, suddenly aware of how bold he sounded, but the words kept coming, tumbling out faster than he could stop them. "Take the owner, for example. Jasmine Crockett. I've heard her name around here, but honestly, I don't know much about her. Probably doesn't even care about us beyond tax write-offs, right?" As soon as the words left his mouth, Ethan regretted them. What was he doing, bad-mouthing the boss to a random customer? He braced himself for an awkward silence, or worse, a scolding. But instead, the woman burst out laughing, a genuine, hearty laugh that filled the space between them. "Oh, Ethan," she said, shaking her head. "You have no idea." Confused, Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. Before he could ask what she meant, She extended her hand across the table. "Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Jasmine Crockett." Ethan froze, his face flushing bright red. For a moment, he thought he might actually faint. Ethan's heart sank as the words hit him like a ton of bricks. Jasmine Crockett. The name echoed in his mind, each syllable heavier than the last. His face burned with embarrassment, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. He stood there, frozen, clutching the empty plate he had just cleared from her table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Ethan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know. Jasmine chuckled softly, her expression a mix of amusement and curiosity. Relax, she said, waving a hand dismissively. It's fine, really. But it wasn't fine, not to Ethan. His mind raced as he replayed everything he had said over the past hour. The casual jokes, the offhand comments about privilege, the not-so-subtle critique of her leadership. All of it came flooding back in vivid detail. He felt like he'd been caught red-handed, standing in the middle of the restaurant with his foot firmly planted in his mouth. I'm so sorry, he finally managed to say, his voice trembling. I didn't mean any disrespect. I swear, if I'd known, she cut him off with a gentle smile. You don't need to apologize that much. Honestly, I appreciate honesty. Not many people speak their minds around here without sugarcoating things first. Her calm demeanor only made Ethan feel worse. If she had yelled at him, or even looked remotely upset, he might have handled it better. But this quiet understanding, was almost unbearable. He wanted to crawl under the nearest table and disappear. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the edge of the table. Tell me something, she said, her tone conversational, but probing. What makes you think I don't care about the people who work here? Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the question. His initial instinct was to backtrack, to mumble something vague and retreat before he dug himself deeper into this hole. But something about her gaze stopped him. It wasn't judgmental or intimidating. It was genuine, as if she truly wanted to hear what he had to say. Well, he began hesitantly, fiddling with the edge of the plate in his hands. I guess it's just, you hear these stories, right? About business owners who talk a big game about fairness and equality, but when you look closer, it's all surface-level stuff. Like, yeah, maybe they pay decent wages or donate to charities, but do they really understand what it's like to be on the ground floor? To deal with late shifts and demanding customers and worrying about whether you'll get enough hours next week? He paused, glancing around nervously to see if anyone else was listening. The restaurant was still buzzing with activity, but no one seemed to notice the awkward exchange happening in the corner. Encouraged by Jasmine's attentive silence, Ethan continued. And then there's the whole thing about catering to elites, he added, gesturing vaguely toward the room. Don't get me wrong, the food's amazing and the atmosphere is great. But sometimes it feels like we're just serving the same people who already have everything while the rest of us are scrambling to make ends meet. Does that make sense, Rikyo? A long moment, Jasmine didn't respond. She simply sat there studying him with an unreadable expression. Ethan braced himself for a lecture, or worse, a dismissal. But instead, she nodded slowly. It does make sense, she admitted. And honestly, you're not entirely wrong. Running a business like this isn't easy. There are compromises, trade-offs, and decisions that don't always sit well with everyone, including me. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised by her candor. Really? Of course, she replied. Do you think I wake up every morning and say, today I'm going to create the perfect workplace where everyone feels valued and heard? No. Some days I feel like I'm failing more than succeeding, but I try, and I listen. That's why moments like this matter. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. Here he was, ranting about someone he didn't even know, and yet she was sitting across from him, calmly explaining her struggles and inviting him to share his perspective. It was humbling and eye-opening. You mentioned earlier that we cater to privilege, Jasmine continued after a beat. And you're right, we do. But let me ask you this. Do you think ignoring those customers altogether would solve anything? Or would it just leave us without the resources to support our staff and invest in the community? Ethan frowned, considering the question. He hadn't thought about it that way before. Sure, he disliked the idea of pandering to wealthy patrons, but he also knew that restaurants like Leavitt's Bistro relied on those customers to stay afloat. Without them, there wouldn't be jobs to begin with. I guess I never looked at it like that, he admitted quietly. That's okay, Jasmine said with a small smile. Most people don't. But it's important to remember that change doesn't happen overnight or in a vacuum. You can't fix systemic issues by cutting ties with the system. Sometimes you have to work within it to make a difference. Her words resonated with Ethan in a way he hadn't expected. For so long he had viewed activism as a black and white battle between right and wrong, good and bad. But sitting there listening to Jasmine explain the complexities of balancing ideals with reality, he realized how much gray area existed in between. So what do you do? He asked, genuinely curious now. How do you balance it all? Jasmine leaned back in her chair, folding her hands together. It's not easy, she admitted, but I start by listening. To my employees, to the community, to people like you. Then I take action, even if it's small. Whether it's offering better benefits, sourcing ingredients locally, or hosting events that bring people together, every little step counts. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Despite his earlier blunders, he couldn't help but admire her approach. She wasn't defensive or dismissive. She was open, reflective, and willing to engage. It was a side of leadership he hadn't encountered before, and it left a lasting impression on him. As the conversation wound down, Jasmine glanced at her watch and sighed. I should probably get going, she said, rising from her seat. But thank you for this chat, Ethan. It's given me a lot to think about. Ethan stood there, dumbfounded, as she gathered her things and prepared to leave. Before walking away, she turned back to him with a warm smile. Oh, and one more thing, she added. Next time, don't assume you know someone based on rumors or stereotypes. You might miss out on seeing the full picture. With that, she walked out of the restaurant, leaving Ethan standing alone amidst the clatter of plates and murmurs of conversation. His cheeks were still flushed with embarrassment, but beneath it all he felt something else stirring, a spark of inspiration. The next few days felt surreal for Ethan. Every time he walked into Leavitt's Bistro, he couldn't shake the memory of his conversation with Jasmine Crockett. It replayed in his mind like a loop, her calm demeanor, her thoughtful responses, and most of all the way she had handled his clumsy critique without batting an eyelash. He had expected anger, maybe even a reprimand from his manager. Instead, he got understanding, and that unnerved him more than anything. By Monday morning, Ethan was determined to set things right. He arrived at work early, before the lunch rush began, hoping to catch Jasmine if she happened to visit again. But when he peeked into the office near the kitchen, it was empty. The restaurant hummed quietly around him as staff prepared for the day ahead. Tables were being wiped down, silverware polished, and fresh flowers arranged in vases. Everything looked normal, but Ethan couldn't help feeling out of place, like he'd disrupted some invisible balance. As the hours ticked by, his anxiety grew. What if she decided to fire him? Or worse, what if she ignored him completely? The thought gnawed at him until he finally worked up the courage to approach one of the senior servers during a break. Hey, Ethan said, trying to sound casual. Do you know when Ms. Crockett might come in again? The server raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the question. Ms. Crockett, she doesn't come in often. Why do you ask? Ethan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. No reason, he muttered quickly, avoiding eye contact. Just curious. The server shrugged and went back to organizing menus, leaving Ethan standing awkwardly in the corner. He spent the rest of his shift replaying their brief exchange, in his head, wondering if anyone else suspected something. Did they notice how flustered he'd been after serving her? Had word spread among the staff about his little rant? When Thursday rolled around, Ethan spotted Jasmine walking through the door just as the dinner crowd started trickling in. His stomach flipped, and for a moment, he considered ducking into the kitchen to avoid her altogether. But then he remembered her parting words. Don't assume you know someone based on rumors or stereotypes. Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to walk over to her table. Ms. Crockett, he began, his voice shaky but sincere. Can I talk to you for a minute? She looked up from her menu, surprise flickering across her face. Of course, she replied, setting the menu aside. What's on your mind? Ethan swallowed hard, his palms sweating. I wanted to apologize again for everything I said the other night. It was disrespectful and I didn't mean any of it the way it came out. Jasmine studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled faintly. You already apologized, Ethan, and like I said, I appreciate honesty, so let's move past it, okay? Her response caught him off guard. He had rehearsed this apology a dozen times in his head, bracing himself for resistance or dismissal. But instead, she seemed genuinely willing to let it go. Okay, he said slowly, still not entirely convinced. But there's something else I wanted to say. Thank you for listening, for explaining, for not shutting me down. Most people wouldn't have done that. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her smile softening. Most people aren't in my position. When you're the boss, you don't always get honest feedback. People either sugarcoat things or stay silent because they're afraid of repercussions. Neither helps anyone grow. Ethan nodded, absorbing her words. For the first time, he realized how lonely leadership could be, not because of the workload, but because of the walls it built between people. Managers weren't supposed to show vulnerability. Employees weren't supposed to challenge authority. Yet here was Jasmine, breaking those unspoken rules simply by engaging with him as a human being. I guess I never thought about it like that, Ethan admitted. But hearing you explain it makes me realize how much I still have to learn. That's the thing about learning, Jasmine said, leaning forward slightly. It's not about knowing everything. It's about being open to new perspectives. You've already shown me that you care deeply about fairness and justice. Now it's up to you to decide what to do with that passion. Her comment struck a chord with Ethan. Over the past few months, he had poured his energy into online debates and social media posts, convinced that raising awareness was enough. But sitting across from Jasmine, he realized how hollow those efforts felt compared to taking real action. Passion without purpose was just noise. What would you suggest? He asked cautiously, half expecting her to brush him off with vague advice. To his surprise, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, thoughtfully. Start small, she said. Volunteer with organizations that align with your values. Talk to people who are directly affected by the issues you care about. And when you see something here at the restaurant that could be improved, speak up. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. Be part of the solution. Ethan blinked, taken aback by her straightforwardness. This wasn't the kind of generic pep talk he'd anticipated. It was practical, actionable, and oddly empowering. Part of the solution, he repeated softly, letting the phrase sink in. That's actually really good advice. Jasmine chuckled lightly. Glad you think so. Just remember, change takes time. Don't expect overnight results or perfection. Progress is messy, but it's worth it. Their conversation ended shortly after that, but its impact lingered long after Jasmine left the restaurant. As Ethan returned to his duties, he found himself viewing the space differently. The gleaming countertops and polished floors no longer seemed like mere props for wealthy diners. They represented countless hours of effort from the staff who kept the place running smoothly. Even the customers, whom he had once dismissed as symbols of privilege, now appeared more complex, real people with stories and struggles of their own. Over the next week, Ethan made a conscious effort to apply Jasmine's advice. He started paying closer attention to the dynamics within the restaurant, noticing subtle ways he could contribute. When a coworker struggled to carry a heavy tray, he offered to help without being asked. When a customer complained about slow service, he listened patiently instead of snapping back defensively. Each small act felt insignificant on its own, but together, they added up to something meaningful. One evening, while clocking out after a particularly grueling shift, Ethan overheard two colleagues discussing a local nonprofit that focused on worker rights. Intrigued, he joined the conversation, asking questions and sharing ideas. By the end of the night, he had volunteered to attend their next meeting. It was a small step, but it felt like progress, a tangible way to channel his passion into action. He walked home under the glow of streetlights. Ethan reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. A single conversation with Jasmine Crockett had shifted his perspective in ways he hadn't anticipated. She hadn't given him all the answers or solved his frustrations for him. Instead, she had challenged him to think critically, act responsibly, and embrace the complexity of making a difference. For the first time in months, Ethan felt hopeful, not because he believed the world's problems would disappear overnight, but because he finally understood his role in addressing them. Change wasn't something that happened to people. It was something people created, one small step at a time. And for the first time, Ethan was ready to take those steps. Ethan's newfound determination wasn't just a fleeting burst of motivation, it became the driving force behind his actions. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into making changes, both at Leavitt's bistro and in his personal life. The nonprofit meeting he attended turned out to be eye-opening. It was held in a small community center on the outskirts of town, packed with people from all walks of life. Teachers, factory workers, restaurant staff, and even a few activists who had been fighting for labor rights for years. Ethan felt a little out of place at first, unsure if someone like him, a college graduate working as a waiter, had anything valuable to contribute. But as the discussion unfolded, he realized that everyone there shared the same goal: creating better conditions for workers. He listened intently as speakers talked about challenges facing low-wage employees, from unpredictable schedules to lack of benefits. Some stories hit close to home, reminding him of struggles he'd seen among his co-workers. Others highlighted issues he hadn't considered before, like how difficult it could be for parents juggling jobs and childcare. By the end of the night, Ethan felt inspired, not overwhelmed, and eager to get involved. Back at work, Ethan began implementing some of what he'd learned. He noticed that many of his co-workers were hesitant to speak up about problems they faced, fearing retaliation or simply assuming nothing would change. So he took it upon themselves to start conversations during breaks or slow shifts. At first, people were guarded, unsure why this new guy suddenly cared so much. But once they saw that Ethan genuinely wanted to help, they opened up. One afternoon, while prepping tables for dinner service, Ethan struck up a chat with a veteran server who had been at Leavitt's for over 5 years. She confided in him about how stressful it was to balance her job with raising 2 young kids. "The hours are fine," she said, lowering her voice so no one else could hear. "But sometimes I feel like management doesn't understand what we go through outside of here. If my kid gets sick, I have to choose between staying home with him or losing a shift. And trust me, every shift counts." Her words stuck with Ethan long after their conversation ended. That weekend, he approached Jasmine again, this time with a proposal. "Ms. Crockett," he started nervously, clutching a notebook filled with scribbled notes. "I've been thinking about ways we can make things easier for everyone here, like maybe introducing more flexible scheduling or letting people swap shifts without jumping through hoops." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on," she said, gesturing for him to continue. "Well," Ethan explained, flipping through his notes, "a lot of us have responsibilities outside of work. Kids, school, family stuff. If we had a system where we could trade shifts online or request time off without feeling like we're bothering anyone, it might take some pressure off." To his surprise, Jasmine didn't dismiss the idea outright. Instead, she nodded thoughtfully. "It's not a bad suggestion," she admitted, "but it's not as simple as flipping a switch. We'd need to figure out logistics, make sure it works for everyone, and ensure fairness across the board. Still," she paused, tapping her pen against the table, "why don't you put together a detailed plan? Include input from your coworkers and any examples you think might work. Then we'll discuss it further." Ethan left the meeting feeling energized. For the first time, he felt like his voice mattered, not just because someone was listening, but because they were willing to act on it. Over the next several days, he gathered feedback from his colleagues, jotting down their suggestions and concerns. Some wanted clearer communication about scheduling policies. Others suggested offering paid parental leave or discounts on health insurance. Slowly but surely, Ethan pieced together a rough draft of what he hoped would become a new initiative at Leavitt's. Meanwhile, Jasmine wasn't sitting idle either. Inspired by Ethan's enthusiasm, she decided to host a series of informal forums where employees could share their thoughts directly with her. These weren't formal meetings with agendas or presentations. They were casual gatherings designed to foster open dialogue. During one session, a dishwasher spoke passionately about the importance of mental health resources for kitchen staff, who often worked long, physically demanding hours with little recognition. Another employee brought up the idea of hosting workshops on financial literacy, helping workers manage budgets and save for emergencies. As these discussions unfolded, Ethan noticed a shift in the atmosphere at the restaurant. People seemed more engaged, more willing to collaborate. Even the usual tension between front-of-house staff and kitchen crews began to ease as everyone worked toward common goals. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements and moments of frustration, but progress was undeniable. One evening, after a particularly productive forum, Jasmine pulled Ethan aside. "You've done good work," she said, her tone warm but serious. "Not just with the scheduling proposal, but with everything. You've reminded me why I started this place in the first place." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. "Thanks," he replied, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly. "But honestly, none of this would have happened without you. If you hadn't listened to me or pushed me to do something, I probably wouldn't have gone beyond complaining." Jasmine chuckled softly. "True. But remember, I didn't give you the answers, you found them yourself. That's the kind of leadership I admire, and honestly, it's something I wish I saw more of around here." Her words stayed with Ethan long after their conversation ended. Leadership. It was a word he had always associated with titles and power suits, not someone like him, a part-time waiter with big ideas and zero experience managing anything. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that leadership wasn't about authority or control. It was about taking responsibility, inspiring others, and working together to create solutions. Over the following months, Ethan continued to grow not just as an employee but as a person. He became a bridge between the staff and management, advocating for policies that benefited everyone. When the flexible scheduling system finally launched, it was met with overwhelming support from the team. Workers appreciated having more control over their hours, and productivity actually improved as a result. Even customers noticed the difference. Servers seemed happier, more attentive, and genuinely invested in providing excellent service. Through it all, Ethan never forgot the lesson Jasmine had taught him, that real change starts with listening. Whether it was hearing out his coworkers' concerns or understanding the perspectives of customers, he learned to approach every situation with empathy and curiosity. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and disagreements along the way, but each challenge only strengthened his resolve. By the time spring arrived, Leavitt's Bistro felt like a completely different place. The restaurant wasn't just a business anymore. It was a community. Employees looked out for each other. Managers actively sought feedback, and initiatives aimed at supporting workers kept rolling out. Ethan couldn't take credit for all of it. He knew it was a team effort, but he was proud to have played a role in sparking the transformation. And somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing himself as just a waiter. He was becoming something more, a problem solver, a connector, and maybe even a leader in his own right. Months had passed since Ethan first stumbled into that fateful conversation with Jasmine Crockett. The restaurant, and Ethan himself, had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. What started as an awkward misunderstanding had blossomed into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared goals. Ethan no longer saw himself as just another cog in the machine at Leavitt's Bistro. Instead, he felt like an integral part of something bigger. a movement within the walls of the restaurant to create real, lasting change. One crisp autumn evening, Jasmine approached Ethan during a rare lull in the dinner rush. "I've been thinking," she said, her tone casual but deliberate. "We should host a public event, a forum where we can talk about labor rights, fair wages, and what businesses can do to support their workers. And I want you to co-host it with me." Ethan nearly dropped the tray he was holding. "Wait, what?" he stammered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You want me to stand up there with you? In front of everyone?" Jasmine grinned clearly, amused by his reaction. "Why not? You've already proven you're great at this. Plus, it'll show people that change doesn't always come from the top. It comes from all levels working together." The idea terrified Ethan. Public speaking wasn't exactly his strong suit, and the thought of addressing a room full of strangers made his palms sweat. But deep down, he knew Jasmine was right. If he truly believed in the work they were doing, why shouldn't he share it with others? After a moment of hesitation, he nodded. "All right," he said, forcing a confident smile. "Let's do it." Over the next few weeks, Ethan threw himself into preparing for the event. He worked closely with Jasmine to plan the agenda, reaching out to local organizations and inviting speakers who could offer valuable insights. They decided to hold the forum in the restaurant itself, transforming the dining area into a cozy, welcoming space complete with chairs arranged in a circle to encourage open dialogue. Posters went up around town advertising the event, and soon enough, word spread throughout the community. On the night of the forum, Ethan arrived early to help set up. He paced nervously behind the scenes, rehearsing his opening remarks under his breath, while Jasmine greeted attendees as they trickled in. To his surprise, the turnout was impressive. Not just restaurant staff, but also teachers, small business owners, activists, and even a few curious locals who had heard about the event online. The room buzzed with anticipation, a mix of excitement and curiosity filling the air. When it was time to begin, Jasmine stepped forward to introduce the evening's topic. Her speech was brief but powerful, emphasizing the importance of collaboration between employers and employees. Then, with a warm smile, she turned to Ethan. "And now, I'd like to hand things over to someone who has played a key role in driving positive change here at Leavitt's. Please welcome Ethan." Ethan froze for a split second, his heart pounding in his chest. As he walked to the center of the room, he scanned the faces looking back at him. Some were familiar, co-workers and friends, but many were strangers whose eyes followed his every move. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "Hi, everyone," he started, his voice shaky at first but growing steadier with each word. "A few months ago, I was just a waiter trying to figure out how to make ends meet. I cared about fairness and equality, but honestly, I didn't know how to turn those ideas into action. Then I had a conversation with our owner, Jasmine Crockett. That changed everything." He paused, glancing at Jasmine, who gave him an encouraging nod. She didn't shut me down when I criticized the way things were run. Instead, she listened. She challenged me to think critically, to take responsibility, and to be part of the solution. That's what tonight is about. Listening, learning, and finding ways to work together to create better workplaces for everyone. As Ethan continued, he shared stories from his own journey, the struggles he'd witnessed among his co-workers, the changes they had implemented at Leavitt's, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. His words weren't polished or rehearsed. They were raw, honest, and deeply personal. By the time he finished, the room erupted into applause, leaving Ethan momentarily stunned. The rest of the evening unfolded like a symphony of voices, each speaker adding their unique perspective to the conversation. A teacher talked about the challenges of balancing long hours with family life. A factory worker described the toll unpredictable schedules took on mental health. An activist outlined steps businesses could take to advocate for policy changes at the city level. Through it all, Ethan sat quietly, soaking in the stories and marveling at the diversity of experiences represented in the room. By the end of the night, something remarkable had happened. Strangers who had walked in as individuals left feeling connected, as though they were part of a larger movement united by a common purpose. People exchanged contact information, promised to stay in touch, and vowed to keep pushing for progress. For Ethan, it was a moment of clarity. This was what he had been searching for all along, a way to channel his passion into action, to make a tangible difference in the lives of others. In the days that followed, the impact of the forum rippled outward. Local news outlets picked up the story, highlighting Leavitt's Bistro as a model for workplace innovation. Other restaurants in the area reached out to Jasmine and Ethan, eager to learn how they could implement similar initiatives. Even the mayor attended a follow-up meeting, pledging support for legislation aimed at improving conditions for hourly workers. For Ethan, the experience reinforced a simple yet profound truth. Change begins with connection. Whether it was listening to his coworkers' concerns, engaging in tough conversations with Jasmine, or sharing his story with a room full of strangers, every step forward had been built on relationships. It wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping reforms. It was about showing up, day after day, and doing the hard work of building bridges. As winter settled in, Ethan found himself reflecting on how far he'd come. He still worked at Leavitt's, but his role had evolved beyond serving meals. He was now a voice for positive change, both within the restaurant and in the wider community. And while he knew there was still so much more to do, he felt hopeful for the future. Not because he believed the world's problems would disappear overnight, but because he understood his place in tackling them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a golden glow across the restaurant floor, Jasmine joined Ethan at a corner table. "So," she said with a playful smirk, "how does it feel to be a leader?" Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "I'm still getting used to it," he admitted. "But honestly, it feels good, like maybe I'm finally doing something that matters." Jasmine smiled, raising her glass in a silent toast. "Here's to making a difference, one step at a time." And with that, Ethan realized that the journey he had embarked on wasn't just about changing the restaurant or even the community. It was about discovering who he was meant to be, and finding joy in the process of becoming that person.